Good morning and welcome. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Welcome to our co-parenting and coffee event. Today's theme is high conflict co-parenting, combating harassment and abuse. I'm Sam. I get the privilege of hosting today, but we have joining us Brook Olsen and Kelli Avallone here with us to discuss this very important topic. Brook is a divorce and custody coach, a divorce mediator, and certified parenting educator with the International Network for Children and Families. He primarily works with families caught in the high conflict cycle. Kelli is a family law attorney specializing in high conflict litigation. She's the main litigator and managing partner at a boutique law firm in Southern California. Both our speakers are joining us this morning to provide strategies for combating post-separation harassment, abuse, and other inappropriate behaviors in high-conflict co-parenting situations. And we also want to be able to answer as many of your questions as possible. So let's get started. Thank you, both of you, so much for joining us this morning. And maybe, Brook, I could start out by asking you a question right away. But what would you say, in your experience, what are some of the most common forms of harassment and abuse that each of you see present in these high-conflict co-parenting situations?
Thanks for having me, Sam. I think that in the 20 plus years that I've been doing this work, nothing's really changed over the years in terms of the type of abuse and harassment that I see coming in. I think the platforms like Talking Parents that are out there have helped really streamline some of that. But with some of the personalities that are in these high conflict situations, there is a propensity for them to um, come at and come at and come at in any form that they can get to the other person. So, giving them a lot of input about things that aren't important, that don't have to do with the kids, that have to do with um, degrading that parent that they're trying to get to through whatever means that they can. And what I've done over the span of the work that I do with people is to try to find ways for them to disengage. So by eliminating phone calls, by eliminating text messages, by coming into the types of communication formats that you guys provide, gives separation. It gives a disengagement platform for them so they can choose what they want to respond to. And we have the opportunity to stop that constant, incessant back and back and forth, because people have a tendency to want to defend themselves, to engage in this, and these platforms give that separation.
Mm. So you're not saying you should stop communicating, but you are saying you should absolutely evaluate the methods maybe that you're communicating. Is that correct?
Absolutely, and
Gotcha.
to really eliminate as much of the back and forth as you can.
Yes. Kelli, what would you say? What have you seen in your experience? What have the common themes been for you?
Yes, Sam, and thank you for hosting this morning.
Thank you.
Really to echo on what Brooke is saying, and really what I think kind of the crux of the issue can be is the frequency of communication, right? You have to kind of envision that in a co-parenting relationship, especially a high conflict one, a lot of what you see is the other parent constantly trying to get your attention, constantly trying to enmesh themselves in your world, especially when you're with the kids, right? Or especially when they know that you're off doing something either special with the kids, or perhaps you're just off doing something and they have the kids, but they know that you're, maybe focused on something different. Maybe you're on a trip, maybe you're at a work conference. It's the frequency in communication. And really, I think one of the things that Brooke mentioned of, let's talk about the ways to eliminate phone calls. Let's talk about the ways to eliminate the different mediums of communication. Talking Parents gives you a really good platform to just streamline it and say, hey, listen, we only have to communicate in one space. It's also kind of a box for your other, to compartmentalize your other co-parent. You're putting them in a box and you're saying, listen, you don't get to violate my boundaries and you don't get to violate my personal space and, my mental health and my mental awareness when we're not in the frame of having to communicate about the kids. If I don't need to communicate with you right now about them, then you know what? I'm going to keep you in the box and I'm going to open that box when I'm ready. And so I really think that Talking Parents and those types of platforms really allow you to do that. And the best part is it's court approved. In fact, the court wants to see you do that. It really puts people in a boundary. The other, factor I think you see a lot of is parents who, again, it's the frequency of communication. And so they're going to message you, and it's either going to be a message that's 7,000 words, or it's going to be a message that's 10 words followed by a message in 30 minutes. That's 10 words followed by a message in 30 minutes. And it goes and goes and goes and goes. And so picking and choosing what you respond to and when you respond to it, I think is really strategic and really critical.
That's so good. Sorry, you were going to say, Brooke?
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that, Kelly, that putting them in the box is sending a message to them that people are going to watch this. There are minors councils, there's attorneys, there's judges potentially that can peek into this. And because there is an opportunity for other people to monitor that, whether that's parenting coordinators or the such, that it can temper that harassment. It can temper that narrative that they're trying to feed. And when it doesn't, what I like about the platforms is that we can follow threads. We don't have to bounce around. We can see in sequence what's happening, and that really helps contain the conversation to a large extent.
That's so good. Even this conversation about containment, because I know I've seen some of your work before, Kelly, and you've spoken about not hoping that the judge or the court system is going to help mediate small family disputes for you. I say small, but obviously things that are important to people, but not necessarily as important to the courts. But you're saying that by setting these containers and these boundaries in the communication, you're able to start establishing and getting back some of that agency. Is that correct?
And you're really able to say, hey, listen, there are certain things in this journey that I'm not going to be able to control. But there are all the ways that I react to it that I absolutely can control. And I don't know, Sam, you've obviously done a lot more of these with Talking Parents than Brooke and I have, but I don't know if you guys have ever cleared up or heard the misconception that judicial officers, so your judges, are sitting in their chambers and they're like, oh, I wonder what the Smiths are doing today. And they just peruse and log into Talking Parents. That doesn't happen. I want you to rest assured that doesn't happen. Judges are not interested in their free time, whatever limited free time they have, in going into your Talking Parents and doing their own exploration. So just to kind of hunker back to something Brooke said, because he mentioned, people can get in here and view it. They can, parenting coordinators can, therapists can, your attorney can, but unless it's put before a judge in some sort of pleading or some sort of exhibit, at least in California, that is not going to happen. They're not sitting in their chambers logging in. So I think that's a common misconception I hear all the time from my clients. And I'm like, wait. Let me get this straight. You think that a judge on their free time is just logging into your Talking Parents because they want to know what you guys are doing today? No, they're not. Please stop.
Right.
So, but the real thing to take away from that is that it's constant and forever and ever and ever memorialized communication. Right. So the way that you're communicating, the frequency that you're communicating, the things that you're saying, nobody can delete those. Nobody can erase them. They are part of a permanent record, which then can be used by these professionals.
Wow. That's good. That's really good. Brooke, what are some communication or behavioral tactics that co-parents can use in these high conflict scenarios to try to combat the harassment and the abuse? Are there any tricks that you've learned along the way?
Absolutely, Sam. what I pointed to a couple of minutes ago is this propensity to react to incoming messages and to the harassment, and that is a neurological response. That is an involuntary piece that we all have that we want to step into and get into the fray with. So the tactics that I teach my clients are ones of self-containment, noticing where that activation comes from. I have basically three rules that I started with: are disengage, disengage, disengage. But before all of that even begins to happen, there's a rule that happens before that, and that is just don't just do something, sit there. So letting their nervous system calm down, see what's in front of them, and begin to look at, okay, is there something here that I really need to respond to?
Mm.
And in most cases, there is not a response required. So that don't just do something, sit there, is that mechanism to let them go, okay, I don't got to go into this. And then the disengagement piece really oftentimes sets the other party off balance because they're used to the engagement, they're used to the back and forth. And then we start a conflict cycle. So by disengaging, that cycle doesn't get the energy it needs to continue. So in using this platform, if you will, I look at the message. I can have somebody else in the background that is looking at this message with me or ancillary to me. And I can have that conversation. Is there something here that I really need to respond to? And most times there's not a response needed. I mean, we're talking about health, education, and welfare of the kids. That's all we need to be responding to. Maybe some coordination issues, but mostly we know what needs to happen for school, for extracurriculars. And there's a calendar that you guys provide that's got that in it as well. So the disengagement piece is really the predominant uh,
And yet,
way to stay out of that fray with them.
but it sounds so counterintuitive, right? That it feels like, but the attack is happening. I need to defend myself, or I need to step up to this. And so what was the second point? You said you had 3 points. I'm taking notes. You said it was disengage. What was the second one? So good.
Disengage, disengage, disengage. It's not a redundancy, but it's a learning how to do this in a manner that I'm increasing my capability of how to disengage. So the first piece is about that reaction. I've got this reaction. The second piece is this is my world, and this is how I'm going to start to not respond on an ongoing basis and not get drawn into a narrative that I don't need to get drawn into. And then the third disengagement is really about, yeah, this is an ongoing piece. I can see it coming, I can see it going, and I can relax into the process.
Yeah. And Kelli, what have you counseled your clients in the past in similar situations? How do they handle that harassment and abuse?
You know what? The reason that Brooke and I work so well together is because we share the same brain. So on that, there is a school of thought in law that if somebody makes an allegation or an accusation against you, that you need to refute it, right? And so to your point, Sam, of, hey, the attack has started, I need to engage, I need to refute these things, I need to go. Well, first of all, even if there is, I don't agree with that. I think that there is so much value in being able to read a message, assess whether or not a response is actually required. Are you talking to me about something that I need to communicate with you about? Or is this just fluff? Are you just spiraling and you're taking me on your little tantrum spiral? Because the latter of the two, I'm not really interested in. And really trying to piecemeal that and figure out, pulling that apart and figuring out, what do I need to respond to and what don't I need to respond to? And do I need to respond at all? Is really kind of the tools that I think it's really important that you work with a coach or you work with somebody to develop. right? Your attorney can help you with those things, sure, but that's going to come at a cost of, $5.50 an hour. That's not necessarily a practical resource when you're talking about a high conflict co-parent that is messaging you 5 to 10 times a day. Right. So you can't run to your attorney with every single message and say, hey, please help me figure this out. So at some point, in your child's life, you're going to need to develop these types of tools. I do believe that you should disengage as much as possible. Even if you can't completely disengage. Let's say somebody makes a completely false accusation against you and you need to respond to it, and you have to respond to it, but you don't necessarily need to respond to it in that moment. And the reason that I say that is because when this person is sending the message to you, and communicating with you, they're hot, right? They are amped up. They are ready to fight. They're probably at a point in their day where they have nothing going on. They have nothing better to do, and they want to engage in this. And they're looking at you as a sporting event. And so, really baiting Bambi is what they're doing. And so if you can kind of pull yourself out of that, give yourself some time and space, and it can be as simple as they make a huge allegation against you. You then respond, hey, listen, I don't have time to address this with you right now. I will get a response back to you, but just so you know, this is completely false. And it can be as simple as that. Hey, this is completely false, but I don't have time to address this right now, but I'll get back to you, later, tomorrow, whenever that happenstances that I have the time to get back to you. That's kind of an effective way of controlling what they're able to bait Bambi into. And so it's not just the frequency, it's not just the disengaging, it's the, if you have to respond, what's the appropriate timing to do that? And that also does another thing for you, right? You're probably pretty angry with the response or the message that you've gotten from this other person, especially if it contains some accusation or allegation against you. That's going to give you a few hours to cool off, to sit with it, to say, hey, listen, let me decide what the appropriate response is and isn't. And it's probably going to help you formulate a response that's more appropriate than not.
Wow.
I like what you said, Kelli, creating a sporting event. I refer to all of this as conflict fishing. So, they're trying to bring you in, they're trying to get you to react, and that's part of the game. And from a neurological perspective in this, conflict is addicting. The drama cycle is addicting, and breaking that is not an easy piece. So when you can notice that this is coming your way, when you can notice that you're getting amped up, that you're getting drawn in, that lure is coming by and trying to get you to bite, it's that place of stepping back. And when you can do that in an appropriate way, when you can have some discernment about what I need to engage with and what I need to not engage with, this cycle can begin to really downregulate itself. We start to pull the energy off of it. And if we're looking at it from a strategic standpoint long term, we're getting the other person off balance because we're doing something that they're not used to us doing.
That's so empowering what you're saying, because it's putting the fishing rod back in your hands then, right? In that scenario, it's putting the control back in your hands.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry,
Well,
I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're fine, Sam. You have to remember that these folks that you're co-parenting with, they didn't become high conflict overnight. Right. So this was their cycle during the relationship as well, whether or not you recognized it, whether or not you yourself played a bigger role than you're playing now, all the different factors that potentially play into it. This person didn't become high conflict overnight. So this kind of drama and this kind of feeding the fuel and the baiting Bambi and the fishing situation, it's all been there. It's all been prevalent through the whole relationship. They didn't change their spots overnight. So they're still looking for that same interaction and that same reaction from you. And oftentimes they are pushing buttons that they know they're going to get somewhere with because they know you. They know how to push those buttons. And so you just have to be really cognizant and not take the bait.
Wow. So that in co-parenting situations, we understand that the number one priority is the children. That is the number one priority. But because of what we're talking about right now, I wanted to actually ask both of you, but Brooke, maybe first, do you have any recommendations on how do you handle your own mental health in situations like this? Like, I'm not ignoring the kids in this situation, but for the co-parent struggling in this situation, being on the receiving end of it, what are some strategies or recommendations for self-regulation or for even protecting your own mental health in these situations?
So I think self-care is really one of the most important things that a parent can do in this process. When we get on an airplane, they talk about decompression of the chamber. If the masks come down, who do you put it on first? You put it on the parent, then you can take care of the kids. And this is really the important piece here, because as a parent, if you are not stable, if you do not have the ability to sort through the stuff and keep your children out of the middle, you're creating the problem. You're not the solution to the problem. So, working with a therapist, working with a coach, having those pieces of self reflection that you can begin to monitor yourself, that you've got some level of metacognition, that you can see what you're doing and intervene in that process is really a part of this process of disengagement. And to have practices or ability around meditation to see who I am engaging with and what is really important there, because we get drawn into these fights that we take as something that's personal. And there's nothing personal going on here. It seems personal. And if we can go, okay, that person is having a moment, that person is struggling, this person has to get out of them whatever they've got to get out of them, and it has nothing to do with me, and I can take that narrative and sweep it away, then this disengagement process becomes really a lot easier. And I keep coming back to this notion of disengagement as a tool, but it's actually a way of being in almost any relationship that we're in. If we can have that sense of self, that when I am attacked and I have this compulsion to engage, that I stop. This transfers into every relationship that I've got, not just this high conflict relationship with the other parent, but with my primary partner, with my children. So now I can come in and I can go, oh, there's something else going on here. What is underneath this that I need to sit with and let soften before I come into? And that's something that doesn't happen easily. It's something that's a practice. And without working with somebody to help you hone these practices to really become proficient at this, you're not going to get here. So the notion of working with professionals in this arena for your own mental health is the long-term solution to much of what we're talking about. Mindfulness.
Yeah. Now, Kelli, let me ask you from a legal standpoint, what would be some steps or avenues co-parents could take to advocate for themselves, like when they are on the receiving end of post-separation harassment or abuse?
Yep. So a couple of things. I normally make this disclosure at the beginning of podcasts. I don't do it so much with Brooke anymore since we have done this a few times together. And I'm pretty sure his listeners, his audience knows. But when I'm talking in legal terms, I'm only talking about California. I only practice law here. I'm only licensed to practice law here. So any advice I give is really only as it pertains to California. One of the things that I will say, and kind of I want to echo in my answer to this question, I also want to echo what Brooke had said, but I'm gonna use different words. So I really think that clients need to take their own accountability. That's the first thing. Are your hands clean in this situation? Do you look like the shining star, or are you part of the problem? And it's not. I'm not naive to the idea that um, you also participated in a high conflict relationship prior to being separated, prior to having a co-parent, and likely without the tools of a coach, without the tools of your attorney, without going to court and seeing how this document reads that you wrote in court out loud. You also may have been some of the problem, because Brooke used the word mindfulness, I'll use the word insight. Do you have insight into how your own behavior is affecting the situation and what you're doing? With that, it really depends on how bad the harassment is. If I have somebody saying derogatory things to my client in Talking Parents, that are just completely not about the kids, that are just ad hominem attacks, that are just attacks on their person, that are just, pointed at them, that are about anything and everything from their parenting to how they perceive them in the relationship, I'm going to keep a record of that. And I'm really going to keep track, and I'm really going to tell my client, hey, bookmark those pages for the future. Because if this person gets to a level where this communication is happening over and over and over again, and they are constantly disparaging you and constantly degrading you in these messages, then potentially there's a restraining order issue. Potentially we need to go to the court, at least get a temporary restraining order, and say, listen, Brooke and I just did a podcast on this. Sometimes there is value in just getting the court in California, of course, to order just a temporary restraining order, just to put a pause button and say, listen, I know that our relationship used to be such that we communicated this way together. Or I know that our relationship used to be such that this was appropriate behavior, but this is no longer appropriate behavior. So sometimes that's an option. But that said, that's very rarely an option. And the communication has to be really disparaging and really bad and kind of a very repetitive pattern. And even when I review that, because before I ever file it, I'm not taking my client's word, I'm reviewing the communication myself. And when I review it, I want to see if your hands are clean. I want to see if you fight back in those attacks and you go on the disparaging train. And, a lot of times I have clients who are like, well, but she started it or he started it. Well, I don't care who started it. I care what you looked like in it. And so, that's one avenue. Another avenue is just a letter to them that's kind of a warning initially. Hey, listen, this communication isn't going to be tolerated. But really back to a couple of minutes ago, what Brooke had said is, and this is very true, if you start to disengage, you're not giving your playmate anything to play with. And so they get bored. And they realize they can't bait you anymore. And so that becomes less of a fun sport. And, a lot of times what else I will see, you'll see a lot of people trying to mimic the behaviors of the other co-parent. It's almost like mocking, but it's like they have become cognizant to the ways that you're doing things, and so they're going to do it too. And it can be everything as large as, hey, I'm going to trade you a weekend, and then changing their mind at the last minute. Then you want to do the exact same thing because you want to retaliate and you want to show them how it feels to make dirty deals, right? That is so true with the way that we communicate as well. A lot of times you'll find that people actually start to use the exact same phrases as you. They start to mimic you. And sometimes what I'm hoping for when I tell my clients to disengage is that the other parent will think that they are punishing us by disengaging as well. And they will show us what it feels like.
Don't throw me in the briar patch.
You know what? I empower you to do it. But sometimes that really is, you'll see that this other parent gets on this train of like, oh, You're going to ignore me, then I'm going to ignore you. And great,
Yeah,
fantastic. One less thing for me to deal with today.
it's good.
So sometimes that can be really effective. Is it's almost like you're trying to teach this person how to do things. So you're like, watch me put on my shoes. Watch me fill up my sippy cup. Um, I love it. Please, by all means, copy me, mock me. Imitation is the best form of flattery, by all means. So I definitely, when the communication gets disparaging, my number one tool to my clients: calm down,
Mm.
disengage. You don't need to respond to that. And let's see how far that takes you. And a lot of times, Sam, that's my advice, even when you start to see a really disparaging pattern, like I was describing in the beginning, where a DVRO might be warranted. Because, let's just talk numbers for a moment. If my client's getting a restraining order and we're spending a day in trial, it's $25,000. So, how much do you really need that restraining order? How much do you really think that restraining order is going to curb this behavior? Because $25,000 is a lot of money to do that. So I'm really pragmatic about my approach to law, and how are we spending your money, and what are you going to get out of it, and what is this really going to do for you at the end of it? Again, I think there's lots of different avenues you can go with it. Some people would maybe file a request for order in California and say, hey, Your Honor, please admonish this person. But again, we're spending thousands and thousands of dollars to do that. Let's disengage first and see if that works, and see if we can train them how to put on their shoes.
I think that's there's two sides to that piece, Kelly, and both are so valid, because that place of that mimic is really something that we see happen often. It's like, I'm going to punish you and I'm going to disengage as well, and it becomes that kind of a game. And the other side of that game that I think is also an important piece to look at is when I disengage, this other person keeps coming at us for engagement, and they keep coming at us for engagement, and they will ramp up their rhetoric, they will ramp up their frequency, they will ramp up the disparaging comments, and that is in a place where they begin to expose who they are, what they do, and it becomes a problem for them as well. So I'll tell my parents that, watch that come through, stay disengaged and watch how that ramps up. But pay attention to how, when it ramps up, you try to get sucked into it more. And then where you sit back and you watch it ramp up to a point of the other parent makes a really big mistake
Ah,
in the process. Or we hit a point, to Kelly's point, where it loses all of its potency and it just crashes. And then we've got this neutral ground where this stuff isn't taking place anymore.
Yep.
now,
And that's important. That's important, Brooke. It always gets worse before it gets better,
ah,
right? Their behavior always gets worse before it gets better, because remember, they are baby. They are trying to, if what they said to you didn't get you to react, they're going to amp it up a level, and that didn't get you to react, they're going to amp it up another level, and that didn't get you to react, they're going to, and so that's going to keep going, and that's okay. Let it. Let it play out. Let this other parent, it's a saying we use in law that maybe we shouldn't, but give them enough rope to hang themselves. Let them make their own bed. Let them
yeah.
build their own sandbox, and that is really what it is.
When your
Now,
enemy's making mistakes, let them.
yeah, don't stop them right there. Now, Brooke, Kelli mentioned in there. She said she counsels her clients to bookmark some of these conversations when they get to be bordering on that egregious level. There, are there any other strategies or recommendations either of you have, though, for how co-parents can use a tool like Talking Parents, but how they can utilize the tool to help minimize the harassment and the abuse?
Well, I think what we've been doing here this morning, Sam, is addressing exactly that, because this is the platform that we are funneling all of the communications through.
Mm.
We are stopping all of the ancillary incomings, if you will, and we're putting it in one spot. And by putting it in one spot, then we can say, okay, I don't see this coming up in my inbox when I'm in my email 15 times a day. It's over there. I can look at it when I want to look at it. I can schedule it when I want to schedule to look at it, which I think is appropriate. So when I get that text message alert that comes in that says I've got a message from Talking Parents, that I've got that turned off. It's over here, and I'm still deciding what it is that I am going to and when I am going to engage in it. And I think the important piece is that we understand that most of the stuff that's incoming that we have the impulse to engage in is not emergency stuff. I have parents oftentimes that go, well, I've got to be on alert. I've got to see what is coming in because it might have something to do with the kids. The kids are over there and they might be hurt. That doesn't happen all that often. And if I am peaked in my engagement of that, I'm always going to have my nervous system in an excited state. I'm never going to be able to calm down and just live my life and be in the flow of things. So this platform allows the parents to go, okay, it's over here, and I can minimize that incoming, and that allows my nervous system to relax, and I can go about my business of living a pleasant, engaged, lovely, joyful life.
Right. Well, I know we've got a lot of questions from the people who've been joining us already today. So let me ask just one more of my questions for you, and then we'll cut over to those. But Kelli, I think you'd be able to best answer this maybe. But could you talk about an escalation path, or in cases where post-separation harassment is persisting or the abuse is persisting, even within like a Talking Parents app, but despite all of that, could you talk to us and say how can people utilize the platform with an attorney or with the court system to help their situation in the long term?
Sure. So I think it's pretty simple because, every attorney is going to be familiar with how to log into a Talking Parents application and how to download and pull the communication and how to search the communication. And I think that it can be really, really, really useful tool to be able to log in and just say, give it all to me, because a lot of our clients are not always tech savvy, right? And a lot of people are really, they want to send you one screenshot at a time. Well, if I'm having a one screenshot at a time of text messages and then piece it all together for myself, it can be a very, very, very time consuming process, which just equates to money. So, having a Talking Parents platform where I can just download a 700-page record and read it for myself is going to be a lot more efficient for your attorney than to have piecemeal communication like text messaging. The other thing that you have to think about is the same goes for the idea that you're putting in a complete thread to a judge. If I'm a judge, I'm going to want to know that you gave me the entire conversation and you didn't leave out bits and pieces where maybe you didn't look so good. And so I'm going to want to see that, you gave me the full thread in Talking Parents. And we've all worked with Talking Parents, right? It's as common as, somebody telling me, hey, here's a drug test from a very common place in San Diego. I'm going to know exactly whether or not that drug test is lawful, faked, valid, etc., because I've worked with them. I've looked at them. I've looked at hundreds of them. And so it's the same thing with Talking Parents. If I'm a judge, I can see the chronology of the page numbers at the bottom. I can see that the thread went all the way through. Whereas if you're in text message, it's very hard to know whether somebody printed the full conversation. Now, if all you have is text message, well, then we're going to do the best that we have. But we have, a rule in California of completeness, and an attorney can object that the document is not complete. Or, when you take the stand and you're testifying about a document, you can say, oh, yeah. But that actually left off the beginning of the conversation where so-and-so said X, Y, and Z. And maybe there's, maybe the text message on its face is bad enough that it doesn't really matter if they left off X, Y, and Z because that should have never been said in the first place. But maybe it's not. And maybe it gives, a shadow of the doubt to the fact finder of, well, hey, is this the complete conversation? Is this litigant telling me the truth? Is this the full story, or am I getting kind of piecemeal chunks? I really like that you can search by thread topic. I'm very type A, and so I am, one email per topic. Like, hey, little Johnny has a dentist appointment, and I want you to put all the stuff about the dentist appointment in there. I really like that. A lot of what I see too in high conflict cases, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, in the questions, but a lot of what I see is that you'll start little Johnny has a dentist appointment, and the other person will respond to something that's completely disorganized and irrelevant to little Johnny's dentist appointment in that thread, but then they'll go over here and respond to, multiple different pieces of little Johnny's dentist appointment in multiple different threads. So that can be really frustrating and annoying. But if you paint that picture for your judicial officer at the beginning of, hey, this is how the communication goes. I try to talk about little Johnny's dentist appointment. Dad pivots to something different and then eventually responds on a completely unrelated thread. Then your judicial officer is going to be able to follow the bouncing around.
So good. That's wonderful. Well, my goodness, the questions are just coming in so fast right now. Again, Brook and Kelli, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation, because I would say of all the comments we're getting, there's just three categories. And the biggest one has got to be people saying thank you for having this discussion and being able to talk about these real world issues. The other two, though, I would say broadly fall into whether it's talking about the relational side of it or the legal side of it. So what I would like to do here is just throw some more of these questions to you, and maybe you guys could answer these. But Brook, you said in there, the three rules are disengage, and I think the third one was also disengage. But Esley said,
Yes.
she said, thank you for putting this together and taking the time from your day. But she said Esley's been dealing with my ex, verbal abuse and insults through Talking Parents, and he won't stop and blames me for his mistakes. He was ordered to live in the same state, but now is living somewhere else and is continually threatening to take her to court and file for full custody. How do I even begin to address this?
That's a really good question. I think I look at this from a couple of different perspectives. If somebody's going to threaten me, I'm just going to sit back and go about my business and wait until they take some action. And really, the noise about disparaging you and getting up into everything that you're doing wrong or everything that you've done wrong in their relationship really is irrelevant to everything that we're talking about here today. So to set that stuff aside and have this notion that what somebody else thinks about me is none of my business, and to just sit and be in your parenting style. Make sure that your parenting is on spot. Your focus is on your kids and on their success, on their development. And everything else that's coming in is a distraction to that. So your nervous system gets excited. You start reacting to what they're saying. There's no truth in it. Let's just sit and take care of business and be in the flow of what's happening in your world and what your children need now.
That's so good. Now, Kelli, you had said just a few minutes ago, you said there are going to be things that I can't control, right? That was I think, the exact phrase you said. And Amy had asked a question here saying she was supposed to have court last Friday on October 6th, but now it's pushed out to January 2024. At this point, we'll have waited 3 years to even have the case heard that I filed for a custody modification, desperately trying to get more time with the kids. And the court system itself is being used to abuse and to remain in control. So do you have any advice on how to get the case heard?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And it's honestly probably a struggle that a lot of people face at some point or another in family court litigation. At least in Southern California, I know that we have a pretty heavy backlog in our family court system. I can't obviously speak to other jurisdictions, like let's say you were in Texas or Florida or Connecticut. But that said, I can tell you that, court gets delayed for a lot of reasons. At least in California, it can get delayed, let's say, if all of the sudden, after your pending a motion, somebody files a request for a restraining order. It can possibly delay the custody. It can delay it if somebody files a contempt of court. There are a lot of intervening factors that, frankly, you might not be able to control and your attorney might not be able to control. But the best way to control whether or not the court system is really, quote unquote, being used to perpetuate the abuse or continue kind of the harassment by creating this delay, creating this stall tactic, is to use a very savvy and strategic attorney, because that attorney is going to know best how to navigate a delay in court. You know, your attorney is going to tell you, hey, listen, a restraining order was filed. We can't go forward on custody. There's zero chance the court's going to let us. Or, hey, listen, the court has a backlog and wants to hear this on a trial calendar. So you're going to be waiting, at least in California, or San Diego, you're going to be waiting until probably late 2024, depending on the length of your trial and what department you're in, et cetera. So honestly, it's too broad of a question to say why it's happening or why the delay is happening. But the best way to navigate a delay in family court is to use an attorney. The reality is there's a lot of things that are happening in a courtroom that your attorney knows or should know is going on, that you're never even going to be aware happened. And so that's something that your attorney can speak to, even if you just have a consult, you know, a free consult with an attorney and say, this is the procedural history, this is where we're at. Probably 9 times out of 10, that attorney is going to be able to give you a pretty good beat on whether or not that delay is justified, or whether or not that delay is exactly that, your ex being able to utilize the court system to continue to harass you and perpetuate the, you know, the custody issues.
So you can use your legal counsel to get inside knowledge on how the system works and how it may be being used even against you in that situation. That would be the best place. Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, and to figure out if your own actions are causing part of the delay. You know, if you're getting your attorney evidence at the last minute and your attorney says, hey, listen, this is good enough evidence that it's worth the delay, well, then your attorney might have a point and there might be a reason for the delay.
Yeah. Now, this next question came from Kaya, and this is one of those situations that is just always so much more difficult because it involves the children. But the question is, how do you navigate emotional manipulation escalating through the children? In order to control me, he controls and manipulates our child. And Brooke, you had said it seems so personal because it feels like they're attacking me. But how do we handle this when it feels like they're attacking me through our children?
So our children are looking for congruency. They're trying to see what is real and what is noise, just like the rest of us. And I keep coming back to parenting. I keep coming back to parenting style. Our connection with our children is something that we need to hold, and we need to hold tight. And that isn't about giving them what they want. It's about being a good, authoritative type of a parent with good boundaries that has full engagement with the kids. Parenting is not a part-time job. We have to keep showing up and shifting what we engage with them with. So we want to be able to lead our children while following them. We need to understand what it is that their directions are, get in step with them, and then direct them in that. That is connection. That is engagement with them. And when they see that from us, when they feel that from us, they know that we've got their back. We're creating secure attachment. And the noise and the chaos that the other parent is causing begins to be the fulcrum in which they start to lean in our direction. So they understand where they are held. They understand where they're seen and heard. They understand where they're safe. And they understand that in that other household, it's chaos. And they start to regulate to where it is less chaotic. So if I'm always worried about what the other person is saying about me, rather than just being engaged with my children, that's where I'm going to go astray.
Mm. Yeah, that is always so difficult when it feels like the children are being used as a weapon in the communication. Um, Kelli, we got a question here that came in from April, and this is also a difficult one because she's saying that Talking Parents has helped keep communication mostly civil, which is the intent, with some aggressive messages sprinkled in. However, recently, the aggressiveness and verbal harassment happened during our custody exchange with our son. I would like to begin to record conversations during these exchanges, but is this legal to do? And if not, how do I handle the face-to-face harassment and aggressiveness? Because obviously there's still going to be some physical interaction, right?
Yeah, and that's, Sam, probably pretty prevalent in a lot of high conflict cases where there is going to be some sort of physical interaction and there is going to be some sort of verbal communication that has to happen without straying into the legal advice of can I record? Because here's why. I am only licensed in California. I can only tell you whether or not you can do such a thing in California. We can talk about reasonable expectation of privacy and whether or not you have any if you're in a public place. But instead of going that far, I want you to know a couple of things, April. Number one, it's not good for your kids to see that you're recording the other parent. Okay. And even if your child is 3 or 4 or 5, you've made thousands of videos on your smartphone of them. They know you're
Oh, I think we may have
recording
just,
the
there we
other
go.
parent. And so with that, oh, did I cut out?
Just for a second, I think you're okay though. You're back now. But you were saying though about
Okay, good.
not good for your child to see you recording the other parent.
Exactly. And your child knows, even by age 3, we all have smartphones. And so your child knows what it looks like when mommy or daddy is recording me. Oh, look at me do this trick, right? And they are excited about that. And so similarly, children know and can see when you're recording the other parent. And so it's automatically making the child think, well, hey, either this person's doing something really great. And again, children are not dumb and they're not ignorant to our actions. So they either think, hey, mommy's recording daddy because he's doing something really great or really funny or really special. And if children can sense kind of the tone of the interaction, they know that mommy's not recording daddy because he's doing something fun or great or special, right? And so it's not good for your children to see record that other parent. And so the better way to avoid that, April, if your child is old enough to get out of the car on their own, stay in the car. Stay in the car, pull up close, let your child unbuckle, let your child get out of the car. Sometimes we don't realize how much we insert ourselves into the drama and into the conflict by doing things that could just be avoided. The other factor is if it is really bad, if it's really problematic, you can go to court and get an order that says, I can record the other parent at exchanges. But again, it has to be really bad and it has to be really problematic. And if you're doing that with an attorney, that's an awfully expensive venture to just get an order that you can record the other parent when there are possibly lesser expense options and avenues that you could take. If your child's not old enough to get out of the car and go to the other parent, you pick the child up, you get out of the car, you take the child, you put the child down, you walk away. Do not participate. It does not matter what that other person is saying. You get back in your car and you limit the exchange as brief as possible.
That's really good. Which still goes back to that disengage principle that we talked about from the beginning, right? Now,
When you stop giving people that attention, they're going to stop chasing it. But you
gotcha.
have to stop feeding it.
Yeah. Well, we had actually a good question along those exact same lines. It says here, in fact, Jasmine put in this question, said, what if you've already mastered the disengagement and the communication is still abusive and never goes with the purpose of making arrangement for the kids? I feel like I'm at the point of not responding at all, even sitting and taking time before I respond and picking and choosing what I respond to. Every single thing I write elicits some type of provocation from him. So yeah, where's the line on the disengagement, I guess is the question.
I think the disengagement never stops. And what we're looking at is, it's a process of competencies. And, when we get into that place of awareness, acceptance, approval, when we're in acceptance of this is my world, this is how it's going to flow, this is what's going to come in my direction, and I don't have to do anything, I get to a point where my nervous system doesn't get all that excited about it. Over time, it starts to just kind of become numb, and it is there again, and yeah, I'm not going to respond. So it's a long term. This is my world, and then we get to a point of approval, and that's like, this is who they are, and this is what they do, and they're compensating for their own problems there, and it's not my problem. And when I can get to that point, everything really settles. So it is a matter of just keep doing what you're doing. Just stay in that flow and notice that, oh, that piqued me. Oh, it didn't have to. Oh, that piqued me. Oh, it didn't have to. And then it just becomes nothing.
So on that same thread, Dave had asked that I don't respond unless there's a question. I don't engage with rants in Talking Parents. But is there a situation where it does become necessary to respond to the rants and to the accusations?
Well, this is what I'd say, and I'd be interested to see what Kelli has to say about it. But from my standpoint, if it's not true, it doesn't deserve a response. It doesn't have to be an engagement in that. If there's something in there that has to do with the kids, that has some validity that you need to take action on, do it. If not, there's nothing really to be done here. And that's just, again, being discerning about what is being asked or what the problem that needs to be solved is. And beyond that, I don't think that there's anything that has to occur in it.
What do you? What would your?
And Brooke, I would echo those same comments. I don't think that everything deserves a response. I think if you really feel like you need to respond, you have the same canned 4 words. Thanks for your feedback. That's not true. I mean, whatever it is that you come up with, you have the same response, because that not giving a single, period more, a single comma more, a single, capitalization more, that's going to almost be as good as disengaging. And if you just feel like there's an itch you have to scratch and you have to defend yourself, then I want it to always be the exact same canned language. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for the feedback. That's not true. That's really all you need to say. But honestly, I'm more of a proponent of just, you don't respond and you let them kind of spin themselves up. And, eventually even a Tasmanian devil gets tired out and stops spinning. So you just let it go.
Because as you said, you're not giving them the toys to play with then.
Oh, correct. And you're not feeding it. That kind of negative energy needs something to feed on. It needs feedback. It needs something to play with. They are baiting Bambi. And if you just let it happen, then you are going right into the trap.
There's a notion in all of this of negative intimacy, and it is a way for them to stay connected to you. So when this is coming at you, that is the way for them to stay connected. And when we let them know over a long period of time that is not going to function, it's not going to work, it's not going to get baited in, I'm not going to play in that sandbox with them, 2 things happen. And I said this a little bit earlier, they're going to ramp up, which is going to expose their personality and what they're trying to accomplish. And it's going to be to their detriment over time. So it's a matter of being able to regulate yourself through all of that onslaught and to and to stay present for it. And then the second thing that can happen in it is when they don't get fed, like Kelli was saying, they go away, or it dramatically decreases in intensity.
That that idea of the negative intimacy is so empowering, because then you understand a little bit of what's happening in somebody else's head and what's compelling them to act the way that they're acting. It gives you a little bit of that power back into your own hands. That's really interesting. Now,
Yeah.
we had several questions along the same lines here about how do you encourage your co-parent to use the app like Talking Parents. One of the questions here was, how do I convince an abusive ex to use the app when they refuse on principle, simply because you've asked them to use it and shared links from the site, and they say that it is offensive to them? They want explicit reasons. Why do you think it'd be useful? And obviously logical rationalization isn't seem to be working and hasn't worked in the past. And that the only reason is because you're trying to stop that harassment and abuse. Any strategies for helping get the other person on board with using the app?
Can I take this one, Kelli?
You can, but I'll follow it.
Okay, I think that there's two pieces here. And it requires a lot of discipline and willingness to kind of sit down. I like to take it down into a simple thought that Talking Parents is an elevated form of email. This is my communication platform. So if I'm going to use email, this is my substitute for email. So if you want to communicate with me about anything, here's the link. I've paid for it. It's all ready to go. All you have to do is engage with that. And I will not respond to any other form. This is my email. So you just sit and you wait, and you sit and you wait, and you sit and you wait, and you sit and you wait, because so many of these personality types have to get a response, and they're going to go to try to get a response from anywhere that they can, and part of it can be a waiting game. And when you can hold that out, suddenly here comes something in through Talking Parents. It goes bleep, they're there, and it's just disparaging the hell out of you for making them use this. And you go, thank you. And that's all you need to do. I've got you engaged in my platform now. So that's one way to go about it. Kelli?
All
You want
right.
to trail
So
that?
that is that's the non-court intervention route. And that's exactly right. These personalities need to engage. And in fact, these people that we're dealing with, they're not dumb, they're smart. And so they know exactly what you're trying to do by putting them in the box, and they don't want to be in the box. And so that's the problem, right? They recognize that you are trying to create a boundary where they can no longer feed on this negative intimacy with you all the time. And they can no longer get your instant gratification of your attention. And they can no longer, reach through the phone and grab you. And that is problematic, because it's that personality that the court is going to catch on to and say, you're the problem. So if you're the person out there that's resisting using Talking Parents, you might be the problem. Or any other platform of communication that kind of creates a boundary in a box. If you don't want that, you might be the problem. I think some people, it's not a realistic option for everybody to go to court and ask for the court to order Talking Parents. But if you have a custody motion, if you have anything on calendar in the near future, it's a very simple request to make of the court. And even though judicial officers are not supposed to order anything that's not before them, if your attorney slipped it in there, you might have some judicial officers that say, oh yeah, I thought the parties were already using Talking Parents. They need to be doing that. And that, your attorney can try. Your attorney can shoot the shot and see if it works. And that becomes a court order. Then the other parent has no choice. Now, in Brook's solution, that is a very practical, pragmatic solution, right? It doesn't cost any money, and you just sit and wait. And because these people do need that constant communication, they do need that feedback, eventually they're going to try to chase you down where they know they can get you, which is where you've told them, hey, you can find me on Talking Parents. And to Brook's point, he said something that was kind of critical. I've already paid for it. I have a lot of people who go back and forth over the cost of whether or not they should pay for it. They should pay for the app. It should happen. It shouldn't happen. Don't let the cost of this become something that's an obstacle for you. Just pay for the app, even if it might be money that you're throwing away every month until the other parent gets on board. Just pay for the app.
Because you're investing in that communication, which is the lifeblood, right, of being able to co-parent, is being able to communicate effectively with each other.
Yeah.
What you're doing is, go ahead, Kelli.
Sorry, you're sending the message that this is important enough to me that, we get on a flat and narrow track about co-parenting, that we can communicate, that it can be effective and constructive, that I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is and pay for it.
And you're also telling the people that are looking, the courts or whatever, that exactly that. This is important to me. I'm not letting money get in the way of what I'm doing here. Let's just take care of the business of parenting our kids.
That's really good. With the caveat that you practice law in a specific region and that it doesn't apply everywhere, though. But Ritesh asked, and this is a great question: if my ex is harassing me on the phone or in person or not following the parenting plan and aspects, can I use the notes section to document those things? And would that help if I ever had to use it in court? It's not in the Talking Parents thread, but if she screamed and yelled at me in a parking lot with the kids right there, I'd make note that she did that in Talking Parents in the notes section. But is that even usable in court?
So here's my answer to that. I get lots of clients who are like, yes, we text back and forth frequently about the abuse, and they would, we would have full conversations about this behavior. And then I read the full conversations and it's exactly this. It's somebody else saying to them, hey, or it's them saying to the other person, hey, I am, observing this behavior, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the other person isn't responding. That's not really evidence. That's your journal. And it's not, to the extent that it helps you create a timeline and you can go back in declarations and refer to it and say, oh, yes, this happened. The better course of action. And again, not every petty little thing that happens is going to need a new Talking Parents thread, because all that you're going to do is perpetuate this cycle of communication. But, if it's really bad, then I might send a Talking Parents thread that says, hey, listen, it wasn't good for our child to, or our children to witness that, this, and this happened. In the future, please refrain and, act appropriately. The other person's response is going to tell me what I need to know. Either they're watching this podcast and or working with Brook or somebody smart that says, hey, listen, you don't respond to that. That's just an accusation, and ignore them. Or they're going to say that didn't happen, or they're going to engage in a long rant about what they believe actually happened. And so, using the notes thread does literally nothing for you. It does nothing for your attorney other than keep track of maybe a timeline for a future declaration, but it's not evidence.
Okay.
Can I add something to that real quick, too? I think that Kelli's point of not everything needs responded to, we don't need to get down into the minutia stuff. This part of disengagement in this, I think what happens for so many people in this arena is they get sucked into the back and forth, and it's really hard to break that pattern. And to come into the disengagement rules is a discipline that takes time to really establish. But if somebody is screaming at me in front of the kids in a parking lot, all I'm interested in is getting my kids. They can scream, they can yell, and if I come back and I engage in the future, this isn't good for our kids, please don't do that. I've just initiated a back and forth. And I am going to get back from them middle finger, a screw you, this is not what I'm going to do. I'm going to amp that up. So again, the discernment of, okay, this is abusive, but you are in control of disengaging from that abuse. You're in control of taking that child, putting the child in the car, and leaving, and then having some transition that lets the child settle, that you come into a relationship with your child with. And this is the normal that they get to experience, rather
Mhm.
than you being all hyped up and going back to, I've got to get onto the computer and I've got to send a message to them not to do this again. Every time you tell them not to do it again, they're going to do it again in multiples.
But this is then a good, healthy reminder for all of us that to be careful of what we respond to in the app too, because that means that we have engaged, and now that's a matter of record then. And Brooke, you had said, most of these things aren't an emergency. Even if it's getting blown up into an emergency, it's not really an emergency.
Right.
And one of the questions we actually had that came in here was asking for some strategies, or maybe even a specific way you can end a text thread to stop yourself from engaging. Is there anything specific that you can do so you can move on with what's important and not react to the thing that is designed to make you react?
Right. So the prelude to the three rules is, don't just do something, sit there.
Mm.
So I'm going to let my system settle before I engage in anything. The best way to stop a thread is just to stop a thread. I don't have to close it out. I don't have to do anything. I just don't have to go there. And again, the impulse to defend, the impulse to have the last word, the impulse to engage is a really involuntary piece for most of us. It's not a conscious um, engagement, and we have to find a way to make it a conscious disengagement. So
Mm-hmm.
here's the impulse. I don't need to do anything. I can just sit here and let it fly. And again, the way to end the thread is just to not respond.
Yeah. Now, Michaela here had asked, how do you stop the harassment from happening in the court as well? And I'm not sure I fully understand what that looks like, but maybe you have more experience in that to say what that would look like.
I think the problem, the question in and of itself, it could mean multiple different things. Are we talking about a similar situation like our prior question where the gal's case kept getting continued? What is it exactly that we're talking about in terms of the harassment in the court? If you're talking about physically, you were being harassed in a courtroom, there's deputies, there's your attorneys, there's the judges. That's something that can happen. If we're talking about somebody continuing to file motions, unfortunately, and again, I will say this for the 1,000th time, I only practice law in California, so I can only speak to California, but you can't prevent somebody from filing continued motions. Everybody has a right to parent their children. Everybody has a right to file motions, and it can be really frustrating. And, your judicial officer may run out of patience for it, but at least here in California, you potentially get a new judicial officer every 3 years. And so if you do, your judicial officer may not be wise to it, which is where you have to have a good attorney that says, hey, Your Honor, I respect that you're here and you're brand new. I'm not new. I've been here a little while. And let me tell you what the kind of method or the methodology is in this case for the other person's harassment. They file motion after motion after motion, seeking the same relief, but kind of masked in a different way. So if that's the way, if that answers the question, great. If the other question is, hey, I feel like when I'm receiving these pleadings, I get a lot of harassment or false allegations in declarations. If that's the case, you get a response to everything. You're allowed to respond to everything. Save your response instead of responding on Talking Parents. Save your response for your court pleadings. And Brooke has already said it once in this question and answer session, but you don't have to respond to every message. And I'm not going to necessarily respond to every message. And there's a time and a place to respond. And those are your court pleadings. Those aren't necessarily back and forth in the Talking Parents messages. And so I think that that's a good avenue for you to say, that's not what happened. This is what happened.
Well, I know we've got people that are probably running out of time themselves, and I want to be aware of your valuable, precious time as well. And again, I do appreciate so much that you're taking the time to talk with us about these things. But maybe a good question here for both of you as we wrap this up would be about involving step parents into the conversation and in the communication. Where does that happen, and what should that look like, especially with these dedicated immutable conversations?
So, step parents have a particular role. And again, this is my opinion. Kelli may have something different to say about this, but I think of a step parent's role as ancillary. I don't think they belong in the thread. I don't believe that they need to get involved in what's going on. That begins to be a triangulation that happens. They step in where they're not supposed to. They have opinions about what should be going on. I think the step parent's job is a coordination with the biological parent as to what do we want to do with these kids. And that is about, again, engagement with the kids, hanging out with the kids, having a more of a mentoring rather than a parenting role with the kids, and letting the parent that is involved with the co-parent, the other parent on the other side of that, have those communications one-on-one. And what will happen oftentimes when we get a new partner or they get a new partner is there becomes a collusive type of piece where it's us against them, and it amplifies the conversation. And I want to keep my communication directly with the other parent. If I feel that the other step parent is coming in, just to know that that's what's going in the background, and just keep my direction kid based, short, brief, as Bill Eddy puts it, BIFF, brief, informative, factual, and friendly. And then that is how you go about your communication with them. And again, the step parent role to me is more of a mentoring, being present for the kids, guiding them, and not getting involved in anything else that's going on.
So just kind of piggybacking on that, I do generally agree with everything that Brooke has said. I think that, one thing that I always tell my clients is, hey, listen, if you are in a co-parenting relationship as such that you need to have a box, you need to have a Talking Parents app that you're communicating with this other parent on, then you are not in the type of co-parenting communication relationship where you should be adding a third party to that. Said differently, if your relationship is such that it necessitates talking parents, then why on earth would it ever be a good idea to give your significant other, your spouse, your new step parent access to that platform to engage in that communication? It's not a good idea. It's going to breed more conflict than it's going to do anything else, because at the point when you're introducing a step parent, the other parent, I think, naturally feels a little bit threatened. And I think that they feel a little bit concerned that your role is going to overshadow their role, or it's going to take away from their relationship with the kids. And eventually, when you get to a place where you're mature, where you're seeing the situation for what it is, you can realize that, hey, just like Brooke said, this step parent can be a positive addition for my kid. This step parent brings things to the table that me and my spouse don't bring to the table, or opens up opportunities or doors for these children that me or my former spouse did not. But when you're in the frame of mind of being threatened, or you're just you lack the critical maturity and the insight to say, hey, listen, this person can be beneficial, then I think you have a really hard communication, a hard relationship in front of you, because you're not going to see the relationship as valuable. You're going to see it as threatening. And so you're naturally going to want to put up defense mechanisms and fight against it. And that, that really just becomes problematic for your kids. The other piece of this is, I do think that a step parent should really be in line with their spouse. What rules do their spouse want to enforce? What parenting style is their spouse? You do need to be an authoritative parent with children. Children need those boundaries. They need to have those rules. They need to have that structure. And frankly, they like it. They don't like the household that's chaos, that's unpredictable, that nobody's home in the afternoon. They don't like that with the lack of structure. And yeah, they may buck the system and try to fight against the boundaries in the household that has the rules, but ultimately, that is the structure that children are seeking. They want to know that somebody cares. They want to know that somebody's mad that they didn't text back. They want to know that somebody is upset that they're not home at the right time. And so when you are the step parent, it's your job to figure out what your spouse's or partner's views are for the children and parenting style is for the children, and do your best to mirror that. It's not your job to enforce those things. If you are not in a position where you can do that, you just say to your co-parent, you say to your spouse, hey, listen, you're going to need to handle this situation. This happened. I'd like you to handle it, etc. You should never, if there's a step parent situation, you should never shy away from the idea that this biological parent wants to speak to you or wants to get to know you. I think you should always be welcoming to that and say, hey, you can get to know me, you can talk to me, you can ask me questions. But there becomes a point where if it's an unhealthy interaction or it's just not constructive, that it's time to end the interaction. But you certainly don't ever need to say, hey, I'm not here for you to discuss this with me. You should allow them to do that.
Yeah. So again, the recurring theme here about keeping those lines of communication open, but also making sure that you're not allowing them to just go off the rails there either.
And I'd like to add just real quick to what Kelli's stringing along here. She said authoritative parenting again, and I've said it a couple of times. For anybody that doesn't understand what that model is, research it. It's the model that you want to have. Authoritative parenting is shown to be the best thing that we can do. And if you're on that one as a parent, you can't really miss.
Yes. Well, and of course, I would encourage all of our viewers to click on the links on the site that go to your individual websites too, Brooke and Kelli. Again, thank you so much. This has been such a good conversation. I've run out of coffee and my the battery has died in my Bluetooth coffee mug. It's been such an engaging conversation. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us this morning.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.